She wrote help on a napkin when the drunk men refused to leave her alone. The stranger sitting quietly at table 17 noticed it before anyone else. What the waitress didn't realize was that the man who rescued her that night was the last vampire king, and he had been waiting 500 years for her to reach out. The clock behind the bar showed 11:47 p.m. when Nira understood she had made a serious mistake. Table 9 had been disruptive all evening. 4 businessmen in costly suits, their ties loosened, their laughter growing harsher with each round of whiskey. She had served them with patience and professionalism, just as her manager taught her during her first week at the Velvet Lantern. Smile, acknowledge them, never challenge a customer. But when the heaviest man seized her wrist as she placed their 4th bottle on the table, his fingers pressing into her skin like a vice, professionalism dissolved into something cold and instinctive: fear. "Where are you rushing off to, sweetheart?" His breath reeked of bourbon and cigars. "Stay with us. Have a drink." "I'm working, sir." Nira kept her voice composed, pulling her arm back gently. His hold tightened. "Come on, don't be dull." Another leaned closer, grinning. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't be working this late anyway. Dangerous area." The third man laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Yeah, real dangerous." The Velvet Lantern was the type of establishment that drew unusual patrons. Hidden in a forgotten district of the city, it was part jazz bar, part upscale restaurant, decorated in deep burgundy velvet with brass fixtures dulled by age. A pianist performed soft, melancholy pieces on a small stage toward the back. Most evenings, the clientele was harmless. Artists, insomniacs, the occasional couple seeking ambiance. But tonight felt different. Nira finally wrenched her wrist free, stumbling backward. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The manager had departed an hour earlier. The cook was in back, headphones on. Her coworker Danny was nowhere in sight, probably outside smoking. She was alone. "Excuse me," she whispered, hurrying toward the bar, her hands trembling as she grabbed an empty tray. That's when her eyes landed on the napkin. White, square, ordinary. Without thinking, she snatched a pen from her apron and scrawled 2 words in jagged, desperate letters. "Help." She positioned it on the tray, right in the center, and turned toward the kitchen. Perhaps Danny would see it. Perhaps the cook would notice. Perhaps. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as winter, cut through the noise. "Excuse me, miss." Nira froze. The voice came from table 17. She had noticed him earlier. How could she not? He sat alone in the darkest corner of the restaurant, barely touched by the flickering candlelight. He wore entirely black, a tailored suit that appeared vintage, possibly decades old, with a high collar brushing his pale jawline. His hair was dark, falling just past his shoulders, and on his right hand a silver ring caught the light, 2 crescent moons encircling a rose. But it was his eyes that held her now. Crimson. Not brown. Not a trick of the light. Crimson. I believe you dropped this," he said quietly, holding up the napkin between 2 fingers. Nira's breath caught. She hadn't approached table 17. The napkin had been on her tray 10 feet away, yet he was holding it. Her gaze flicked to the tray. Empty. She didn't know what to say. Her mouth opened, closed. The men at table 9 were still laughing, oblivious. The man at table 17 tilted his head, steadying her with an expression neither kind nor cruel, just ancient, as though he had seen 1,000 faces like hers and remembered every one. "You called for help," he said softly, "didn't you?" Before Nira could respond, the lights flickered, once, twice. The pianist's hands froze mid-chord. The laughter at table 9 died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Nira turned. The 4 men were staring at the corner, at table 17, their faces drained of color. The heaviest one, who had grabbed her wrist, had gone completely rigid, his mouth hanging open as though he'd forgotten how to close it. One of them stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "We're leaving," he muttered, voice tight with panic. "Now? We didn't even pay." "Now." They scrambled toward the exit, shoving past each other in their haste. Within seconds, they were gone, the doors swinging wildly behind them. The restaurant fell silent except for the soft hum of the overhead fan. Nira turned back to table 17, her pulse racing. It was empty. The man was gone. The chair was pushed in neatly as if no one had ever sat there. Even the wine glass he'd ordered, untouched, she remembered, had vanished. And the napkin? Gone too. Nira stood frozen in the middle of the restaurant, her hands still gripping the empty tray, her mind struggling to process what had just occurred. The pianist cleared his throat and resumed playing, the soft melody filling the space as though nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. She could still feel it, the weight of those crimson eyes on her skin, the way the air had turned cold the moment he spoke, the unnatural silence that had consumed the men's drunken laughter whole. Danny pushed through the kitchen door, yawning. "Hey, did table 9 leave? They didn't pay." "They left," Nira said quietly, her voice distant. "Great, that's coming out of your tips, you know." She barely heard him. Her gaze drifted back to table 17, to the empty corner where candlelight still flickered against the wall. And there, carved faintly into the dark wood of the table, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. 2 crescent moons encircling a rose. The velvet lantern closed at 1 in the morning, but Nira didn't leave until nearly 2. She had scrubbed tables that didn't need scrubbing, reorganized the napkin dispensers twice, and counted the register 3 times, anything to avoid stepping outside. Danny had left an hour earlier with barely a wave, and the cook had simply grunted goodbye before disappearing into the night. Now, she stood alone in the empty restaurant, staring at the back door leading to the alley. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself. "It was just an unusual customer, nothing more." But her hands were still shaking as she grabbed her coat and pushed open the door. The alley was narrow and dark, lined with dumpsters and fire escapes zigzagging up the brick buildings like metal veins. A single street light flickered at the far end, barely piercing the shadows. Nira pulled her coat tighter and started walking, her footsteps echoing off the damp pavement. She made it exactly 12 steps before she heard them, footsteps behind her. Multiple sets, heavy and deliberate. "Well, well, look who it is." Nira's blood turned to ice. She didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice, the bourbon-soaked rasp of the man from table 9, but she turned anyway, slowly, and found all 4 of them blocking the alley behind her. They looked different now. Angry, humiliated, dangerous. "You cost us a lot of money tonight," the heaviest one said, stepping forward. His tie was completely undone now, hanging around his neck like a noose. "I didn't—" Nira's voice cracked. She took a step backward. "I didn't know what you're talking about." "Don't play stupid." Another moved to her left, cutting off her escape route. "That guy in the corner. You signaled him somehow, didn't you? What did you do? Call the cops?" "He wasn't—" Nira swallowed hard. "I didn't call anyone." "Liar."
They were closing in now, forming a loose circle. Nira's heart slammed against her chest. Her phone was in her purse, but her hands were shaking too badly to reach for it. The streetlight flickered again, casting their shadows long and twisted across the alley walls. "Someone help me," she thought desperately. "Please." "You called for help." The voice slid through the darkness like silk over ice. Smooth, quiet, impossibly close. All 4 men froze. Nira's heart caught as a figure stepped out from the shadows near the dumpster. How he had gotten there without a sound, she had no idea. One moment the space had been empty, the next he was standing there as if he had always existed in that exact spot. Lucien. The man from table 17. He looked exactly the same, black suit, silver ring, dark hair framing a face too pale to be human. But his eyes were different now. In the dim light of the alley, they weren't just crimson, they were glowing. "Walk away," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the 4 men. The heavy one laughed, but it sounded forced. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Lucien didn't answer. He simply took 1 step forward. It happened so fast Nira almost missed it. One moment the man was standing 10 feet away, the next he was directly in front of the heavy-set businessman, moving with a speed that defied physics. No running, no sound, just there. "I said," Lucian repeated, his voice dropping to something barely qualifying as human, "walk away." The man's face went chalk white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him, his friends had gone completely still, their eyes wide with primal animal fear. What are you?" one of them whispered. Lucian tilted his head slightly, and for just a moment, Nira saw something flicker across his face. Something ancient and terrible and utterly inhuman. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that were just a fraction too sharp. "Someone you don't want to meet twice." They ran. All four of them bolted down the alley like prey fleeing a predator, stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape. Within seconds, they had vanished around the corner, their footsteps fading into the night. Silence fell over the alley. Nira stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold brick wall, her mind unable to process what she just witnessed. Lucian turned to face her slowly, the glow fading from his eyes until they looked almost normal again. Almost. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. How did you? "You should go home," he said quietly, ignoring her question. "It's not safe here." "Not safe? What are you?" For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. "My name is Lucian." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you'll get tonight." He turned to leave, his coat billowing slightly in a wind Nira couldn't feel. "Wait!" She pushed off the wall, taking a step toward him. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Lucian paused, his back still turned. "No," he said softly, "but I knew someone who wrote her name the same way you do." Before Nira could ask what that meant, cold mist swept through the alley, thick and unnatural. She blinked, and when her vision cleared, Lucian was gone, vanished as if he had never existed at all. Nira didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the alley over and over. The impossible speed, the glowing eyes, the way four grown men had fled like children from a nightmare. What are you? By the time her alarm went off at noon, she'd convinced herself it had been a hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, perhaps someone had slipped something into her water at work. But when she lifted her wrist, she saw the bruises. 4 distinct finger marks, purple and tender, exactly where the businessman had grabbed her. That had been real, which meant everything else? She pushed the thought away and got ready for her shift. The velvet lantern looked different in the late afternoon light, almost normal. The velvet didn't seem as deep, the brass fixtures less tarnished. Nira arrived early, hoping the familiar routine of prep work would quiet her racing mind. It didn't. Every shadow made her jump. Every creak of the floorboards sent her heart into her throat. By the time the first customers trickled in at 7, she was wound so tight she nearly dropped a tray of glasses. "You okay?" Danny asked, frowning. "You look like you saw a ghost." Close enough, Nira thought, but she just nodded and forced a smile. The evening crawled by. A few couples, some college students, a regular who always ordered the salmon and read the same book every week. Normal, boring, safe. Nira had never been so grateful for boring in her life. Until 11:34 p.m. She was wiping down the bar when the door opened, letting in a gust of cold night air. Lucian walked in. Nira's hands froze mid-motion, the cloth falling from her fingers. He moved through the restaurant with that same unnatural grace, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor, and sat down at table 17. The same table, the same corner, as if nothing had happened. The pianist was playing tonight. A woman with silver hair who sang old jazz standards and a voice like smoke and honey. Lucian sat perfectly still, watching the stage with an expression that might have been appreciation or might have been profound sadness. It was impossible to tell. Nira's manager nudged her. "Table 17, your section." Her legs felt like lead as she approached, notepad timbering in her hands. Up close, she could see details she'd missed in the darkness. The old-fashioned cut of his suit, the antique watch chain visible at his vest, and the ring that caught the candlelight with every slight movement of his hand. "Good evening," she managed, her voice barely steady. "Can I get you something?" Lucian looked up and his crimson eyes met hers with that same ancient recognition. "Red wine," he said softly. "Whatever the house offers." Nira nodded and fled to the bar, her heart hammering. She poured the wine with shaking hands, watching him from the corner of her eye. He hadn't moved, not even blinked as far as she could tell. When she returned and set the glass down, he didn't reach for it. "Thank you," she blurted out, the words tumbling free before she could stop them. "For last night, in the alley, you saved me." Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to the stage where the singer crooned about lost love and cigarette smoke. "I don't help humans," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the music. "Then why did you help me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a napkin from the dispenser and produced a fountain pen from his jacket. Actual ink, she realized, not ballpoint. He wrote something in smooth, flowing script and folded the napkin precisely and held it out to her.
"Your shift ends in 20 minutes, he said. "Go straight home. Don't take the alley." Nira took the napkin with trembling fingers. "How do you know when my—" But when she looked up, his attention had returned to the stage, effectively dismissing her. She walked away on unsteady legs, the folded napkin burning against her palm. She waited until she was back at the bar before unfolding it. Inside, written in the most beautiful handwriting she'd ever seen, the kind that belonged in museums, in letters from centuries past, was a single word: Nira. Her name. But not just her name, it was written in a style she'd seen before, in old documents and antique books. Each letter was perfectly formed, the flourishes exact and deliberate, the spacing mathematical. This wasn't modern handwriting. This was calligraphy from another age. She looked back at table 17, questions burning on her tongue, but Lucian was already standing. He placed several bills on the table, far too much for a single glass of wine, and walked toward the door. The wine sat untouched, the glass full, the liquid dark as blood in the candlelight. Just like before, he'd never taken a single sip. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Nira stood frozen at the bar, the napkin clutched in her hand, her name written in ink that seemed too perfect to be real. "I don't help humans, not usually." The implications settled over her like ice water. If he didn't help humans, what did that make him? Nira spent the next 3 days trying to forget. She threw herself into work, picked up extra shifts, stayed late to help with inventory, anything to keep her mind occupied. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw crimson irises glowing in the dark. Every time she opened her wallet, the napkin with her name fell out, the ink still pristine as if it had been written yesterday or 100 years ago. On the 4th day, her resolute crumbled. She found herself standing outside the central library at 2 in the afternoon, clutching her phone with a screenshot of Lucian's ring burned into her screen. She'd sketched it from memory that first night, 2 crescent moons encircling a rose, and the image had haunted her ever since. The library was old, one of those Carnegie buildings with marble floors and vaulted ceilings that made every footstep echo. Nira headed straight for the back section, where dusty books on mythology and folklore lined shelves that probably hadn't been touched in years. She started with basic vampire mythology. Most of it was predictable. Stakes, garlic, sunlight, folklore from a dozen different cultures, each with their own interpretation of the undead. Nothing about symbols or crests. 2 hours later, her eyes burning from squinting at faded text, she finally found something. The book was leather-bound and ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. The title had faded, but she could make out the words, "The Lost Courts of Night, a historical account of vampire nobility." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few chapters detailed various vampire houses throughout history, bloodlines that had ruled in secret, courts that had risen and fallen like human empires. Most of the information was written like academic speculation, as if the author didn't quite believe what they were documenting. And then, on page 247, she saw it. The symbol. 2 crescent moons encircling a rose, rendered in precise ink illustration. Beneath it, a caption. "The crest of the House of Dusk, circa 1523. Nira's breath caught. Her eyes raced across the text. The House of Dusk was the most powerful vampire court in Eastern Europe, ruling from a hidden fortress in the Carpathian Mountains. Unlike other vampire nobility who viewed humans as mere cattle, the House of Dusk was known for a peculiar philosophy that humans and vampires could coexist, perhaps even— The next word had been scratched out, rendered illegible. The court vanished mysteriously in 1524, following the assassination of their king's human consort. Some scholars believe the entire bloodline was wiped out in the ensuing civil war. Others claim the vampire king survived, but was cursed to wander eternally, unable to rule, unable to die, until again, the text was damaged, whole sentences lost to time and decay. Nira flipped the page frantically, her heart pounding. There, near the bottom, she found an illustration, a faded painting reproduced in grainy black and white. It showed a tall figure in medieval dress, his face partially shadowed, standing beside a woman in an elaborate gown. The caption read, "Artist's interpretation of the vampire king of the House of Dusk and his human queen, Niralda, based on recovered portraits circa 1523. Nira's vision blurred. Niralda. Her name she spoke about. The book slipped from her numb fingers, landing on the table with a soft thud. Her name. It was her name. Not exactly, but close enough that it made her skin crawl. Close enough that it couldn't be coincidence. She forced herself to keep reading. According to legend, Queen Niralda discovered a plot to overthrow the king by members of his own court who despised his human sympathies. She died protecting him, though accounts vary on the exact nature of her death. Some say she was poisoned, others claim she was killed by sunlight meant for the king himself. What all accounts agree on is this: the king survived, but at a terrible cost. In his grief, he either destroyed his own court or was cursed by them. The House of Dusk fell, and the vampire king vanished from history. One fragmentary text suggests the curse was specific, that the king would walk the earth until his queen's soul returned to the world, and only then could he reclaim his throne or find true death. However, this is likely romantic embellishment rather than historical fact. Nira sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. I knew someone who wrote her name the same way you do. Lucien's words from the alley echoed in her head. No, it was impossible. Reincarnation, curses, vampire kings. It was all fantasy, stories. The author even said it was romantic embellishment. But the ring was real, the crest was real, and Lucien was definitely real. She looked back at the illustration again, at the shadowed figure of the vampire king. The image was too degraded to make out features, but something about his posture, the way he held himself, felt achingly familiar. Nira's phone buzzed. A text from her manager. Can you cover tonight? Danny called in sick. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'll be there. She photographed every relevant page, then carefully returned the book to its shelf. As she left the library, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too normal. The world around her continued as if nothing had changed. People walking dogs, cars honking, a street vendor selling pretzels.
But everything had changed, because now she had a question that demanded an answer, and she knew exactly where to find him. Nira waited until closing time. The velvet lantern emptied slowly that night, the last customers lingering over dessert and coffee until nearly 1:30. She cleaned with methodical precision, each movement automatic, while her mind rehearsed a dozen different confrontations. Danny left first, then the pianist, then finally the cook. The manager locked the front door and handed Nira the keys to the back. You sure you're okay closing alone? He asked, frowning. After what happened last week? I'm fine, Nira said quickly. I'll be careful. He nodded and left through the front. And suddenly, she was alone in the dim restaurant, surrounded by shadows and the lingering smell of coffee and candle wax. She didn't bother with her coat. Instead, she walked straight to the back door, pushed it open, and stepped into the alley. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of rain. The streetlight at the far end flickered, just like before. Nira stood in the middle of the alley, her heart hammering, and spoke to the darkness. I know you're here. Silence. I went to the library today. I found a book about the House of Dusk, about a vampire king and his human queen. The shadows shifted. Her name was Niralda. Nira turned slowly, scanning the darkness. And you knew her, didn't you? You should go home. Lucien's voice drifted from somewhere behind her, quiet and resigned. Nira spun around. He was leaning against the brick wall near the dumpster, exactly where he'd appeared last time. How long had he been standing there? Had he been waiting? Answer my question, she demanded. Lucien stepped forward into the weak pool of light from the street lamp. In the darkness, his pale skin seemed to glow faintly, and his eyes, those impossible crimson eyes, held an exhaustion that looked ancient. "Yes," he said simply. "I knew her. The book said she died 500 years ago." "She did." "And the king," Nira's voice caught. "The book said he was cursed to wander until her soul returned to this world." Lucian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through skin and bone to something deeper. "Do you believe in curses, Nira?" he asked softly. "A week ago, I didn't believe in vampires." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Fair enough." "Tell me the truth," Nira said, taking a step toward him. "All of it." Lucian sighed, a sound that carried centuries of weariness. "I am what you think I am, the exiled king of a court that no longer exists. When Nerelda died, my own people cursed me, those who believed humans were beneath us. That loving one made me weak." "What kind of curse?" "To wander," he said quietly, "neither fully alive nor truly dead, unable to reclaim my throne, unable to find peace until the soul I lost found its way back to this world." He looked at her directly. "When you wrote that word, help, on the napkin, I felt it here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "Like an echo of a bond that was broken 5 centuries ago." Nira's breath came faster. "You think I'm her? Your dead queen?" "I think your soul lives in you, yes." "That's insane." "Is it?" Lucian tilted his head. "You write your name the same way she did, the old way, with flourishes that haven't been taught in 300 years. You placed that napkin on the tray without thinking, the exact same gesture she used when she needed me in court. And when I saw you, when I heard your voice, every instinct I've buried for 500 years came roaring back to life." Nira shook her head, backing away. "No, I'm not. I'm just a waitress. I'm nobody special. I don't remember anything about past lives or vampire courts or—" "The heart remembers what the mind forgets." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, closing the distance between them in one fluid movement, "that your soul remembers me, even if your mind doesn't. It's why you're standing here instead of running. It's why you felt safe enough to call for help in the first place." Nira wanted to argue, to laugh it off, to walk away from this beautiful, impossible creature and his insane story. But something deep inside her, something she couldn't name, whispered that he was telling the truth. "I don't want this," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't want to be part of some ancient curse." "I know," his expression softened. "Neither did she." Before Nira could respond, his head snapped up suddenly, his entire body going rigid. His nostrils flared and his eyes blazed brighter. "Go inside," he said urgently. "Now." "What? Why?" "Someone's coming." His hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Someone who knows what you are." "What I am? I don't even know." "Nira." The fear in his voice, real, genuine fear, from a creature that moved faster than her eyes could track, sent ice through her veins. She ran for the door, but before she could reach it, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A crimson rose lying on the ground near the entrance. Fresh, perfect. She hadn't seen it when she came outside. Lucian cursed softly in a language she didn't recognize. "They found you," he whispered. The rose sat on Nira's pillow the next morning. She woke to find it there. Petals so deep red they looked black in the early light. Thorns gleaming like tiny knives. Her windows were locked, her door was bolted. She lived on the 4th floor. Yet there it was. Nira didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat had closed around a terror so profound it had no sound. She called in sick for work for the first time since she'd been hired. By noon, she'd convinced herself to leave her apartment. By 2 p.m., she was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, nursing a latte she couldn't taste, when the man sat down across from her. He was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair and eyes that burned with righteous certainty. He wore a priest's collar and carried a leather-bound book that looked older than the library she'd visited. "Nira Castellan," he said, his voice accented, Eastern European, she thought. "We need to talk about your soul." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the coffee shop was crowded, safe, and something about the way he said her full name, a name she rarely used, rooted her to the spot. "Who are you?" "Father Constantine." He set the book on the table between them. "I'm part of an organization dedicated to hunting creatures of the night. Vampires, specifically, and the abominations they create." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" He leaned forward. "You've been marked, Miss Castellan. We've been tracking the Vampire King for decades, waiting for signs of his return. And now, finally, his queen has resurfaced." Nira's hands tightened around her cup. "You're insane!" "Am I? Tell me, when did the dreams start?" She went cold. "What dreams?" "The ones where you remember dying, where you see ballrooms lit by candlelight, where you taste poison on your tongue, where you watch the king kneel beside your corpse as dawn breaks."
Nira's cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, coffee spilling across the table. Because he was right. The dreams had started 3 nights ago. Fragmented, violent flashes that left her gasping awake at 3 a.m. A grand ballroom, music playing, a silver chalice pressed to her lips, the taste of wine turning to ash, and Lucian, younger somehow, desperate, holding her as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. She thought they were just nightmares. How do you know about... "Because it's happened before," Father Constantine interrupted. "The curse tries to complete itself. Her soul returns, memories begin to surface, and the king's power grows stronger. If the bond fully reforms," he shook his head grimly, "the House of Dusk will rise again, and with it, an age of darkness this world cannot afford." I'm not trying to bring back anything. I don't even understand what's happening." "I know." For the first time, something like pity crossed his face. "You're an innocent in this, a vessel. That's precisely why you must be stopped." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "You want to kill me?" "I want to prevent an apocalypse," he corrected. "The king cannot fully return without his queen. Break the cycle and the curse ends. It's unfortunate, but..." Nira was already moving, shoving back from the table, her chair screeching across the floor. People turned to stare, but she didn't care. She ran for the exit, bursting onto the street into afternoon sunlight that suddenly felt like the only safe thing in the world. She didn't stop running until she reached her apartment, locked every lock, and shoved a chair under the doorknob. Only then did she let herself shake. The dreams came again that night, but this time they were worse. She stood in a ballroom wearing a gown she'd never owned, heavy velvet the color of midnight. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on marble walls, music playing, a waltz from another century, and Lucian stood before her in formal dress, his hand extended. "Dance with me," he said, and his voice echoed strangely, as if coming from very far away. "I don't know how," Nira heard herself say, except the voice wasn't quite hers. The accent was different, older. "Yes, you do." He smiled, and it was the first time he'd seen him truly smile. "You always have." The scene shifted violently. Blood on marble floors, screaming, someone shoving a chalice into her hands. "Drink it," a woman's voice, frantic. "If you don't drink it, they'll kill him at dawn." The wine burned going down. Wrong. poisoned. She was falling, and Lucien was catching her, his face transforming from confusion to horror to rage in the span of a heartbeat. "No," he whispered, cradling her. "No, Narelda, no." "I saved you," she managed, blood on her lips. "Remember that. I saved—" Darkness. Nara woke up screaming. Her sheets were soaked with sweat. Dawnlight crept through the curtains, and there on her nightstand, where nothing had been before, sat another crimson rose. Beside it, a note in flowing script, written in century-old script, warning her to stay hidden. Nira grabbed her phone with shaking hands and texted her manager. "I need a few days off. Family emergency." The response came immediately. "Take all the time you need. Be safe." She stared at those two words. Be safe. She didn't even know what that meant anymore. Outside her window, the city continued its normal rhythm. Cars honking, people walking, the world turning as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Because now she remembered dying, and she understood with terrible clarity that Father Constantine wasn't the only one hunting her. Nira lasted 4 days before cabin fever and guilt drove her back to work. 4 days of staring at walls, jumping at every sound, and dreaming of deaths she'd never died. 4 days of roses appearing in impossible places and notes written in century-old script warning her to stay hidden. But she couldn't hide forever, and despite everything, the dreams, the hunters, the impossibility of it all, the Velvet Lantern was the only place that felt real anymore. Saturday night, the restaurant was packed, every table full, the pianist playing to an actual crowd for once. Nira moved through the chaos on autopilot, taking orders, delivering drinks, pretending everything was normal. She had almost convinced herself it was working. Then she saw them. 3 people sitting at the bar, nursing drinks they never touched. A woman with short blonde hair and cold eyes, a younger man with a crossbow tattoo on his forearm, and Father Constantine, his priest color visible even in the dim light. They weren't looking at her. They didn't need to. They were waiting. Nira's tray trembled in her hands. She turned quickly, heading for the kitchen, her mind racing. The back exit, she could slip out, run, disappear into the night. "Table 17 would like to see you." Danny's voice made her jump. She turned, following his gesture, and her heart stopped. Lucien sat in his usual corner, perfectly still, his crimson eyes locked at the hunters at the bar. Nira crossed the restaurant on shaking legs. The moment she reached his table, he spoke without looking at her. "They're going to move soon," he said quietly. "Too many witnesses right now, but the moment the crowd thins." "What do I do?" "Stay close to people. Don't go anywhere alone." Finally, he looked up at her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. "And when I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" "Lucien." The front window exploded. Glass showered across the restaurant as someone crashed through in a spray of shattered fragments. Screams erupted, tables overturned, the pianist's music cut off mid-note. Father Constantine stood in the center of the chaos, pulling a silver stake from inside his coat. "In the name of God and the Holy Order, I command the abomination at table 17 to show itself." The restaurant froze. Every eye turned to Lucien. He stood slowly, brushing glass from his sleeve with almost casual precision. "You break my favorite restaurant, then invoke God. Your priorities are showing, priest. Your queen will die tonight. The cycle ends here."
Lucian's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. "No," he said simply. "It doesn't." The hunters moved as one. The blonde woman producing a crossbow, the younger man pulling out vials of what looked like water. Holy water, Nira realized distantly. Lucian moved faster. One moment he was standing at the table, the next he was between Nira and the hunters, and his hand was raised in a gesture that was almost lazy.
The blonde woman's crossbow bolt stopped mid-air, just stopped, suspended 3 feet from Lucian's chest, quivering in empty space. "Run," Lucian said softly, not taking his eyes off the hunters. "Everyone, run, now." The crowd didn't need to be told twice. People stampeded toward the exits, scrambling over furniture, shoving through doors. Within seconds, the restaurant had emptied except for Nira, the hunters, and Lucian. "Nira," Lucian said, his voice carrying a note of command that made her bones vibrate. "Run." "I'm not leaving you." The young hunter threw the vial. Holy water splashed across Lucian's shoulder, and for the first time, Nira saw him flinch. Steam rose from where the water touched, his jacket burning away to reveal skin that blistered and healed in the same instant. "Impressive," Lucian said through gritted teeth, "but insufficient." He moved again, that impossible speed, and suddenly the young hunter was flying backward, crashing through a table. The blonde woman fired another bolt, but Lucian caught it bare-handed, snapping it like a twig. Only Father Constantine remained standing, pulling out a golden cross that gleamed with an inner light. "Show them," the priest commanded. "Show them what you really are, demon." Lucian went very still. "You want to see the king?" he asked softly. "Very well." The change happened so fast, Nira almost missed it. His eyes blazed like burning coals, his canines elongated into something that couldn't be hidden. The air around him seemed to shimmer and darken, as if reality itself was bending away from him. Power rolled off him in waves, ancient, terrible, utterly unhuman. This wasn't the quiet man who ordered wine he never drank. This was the vampire king, and he was magnificent. "Leave," he said, and his voice echoed with layers of sound that shouldn't exist. "Or I remind you why your order fears my name." Constantine raised the cross higher. "The girl dies tonight, monster. If not by my hand, then by God's judgment. She's the anchor to your curse." "She's mine," Lucian snarled, and the windows rattled. "You will not touch her." The priest lunged forward, cross blazing. Lucian caught his wrist, stopping the cross inches from his chest. Steam rose from his palm where it touched the holy metal, but he didn't let go. "I have walked this earth for 500 years. I have seen empires fall and religions rise. I have buried more priests than you can count." He leaned closer. "And I will bury you too, if you threaten her again." He released Constantine's wrist and shoved him backward. The priest stumbled, shock written across his face. Around them, the restaurant was destroyed. Broken tables, shattered glass, overturned chairs. And through it all, Nira stood frozen, memories crashing through her like a flood. The ballroom, the poison, Lucian holding her as she died. "I remember," she whispered, her knees buckling. Lucian caught her before she hit the ground, his arms impossibly strong, yet infinitely gentle. His true form was already fading, the power receding, leaving only the man who'd sat at table 17 and watched her with ancient sorrow. "You did, and I've cursed your choice every day since." A sharp pain exploded through Lucian's back. He gasped, his grip on Nira loosening. She stumbled back and saw it, a silver stake protruding from between her shoulder blades. thrust there by Father Constantine. Holy silver, the priests panted, still holding the shaft. Blessed by 3 popes. You're finished, demon. Lucien fell to his knees, black blood seeping through his shirt. The stake was glowing with that same golden light as the cross, and where it touched him, his flesh turned gray and lifeless. No, Nera screamed. She launched herself at Constantine, but the blonde hunter caught her, arms like iron bands around her waist. It's better this way, she hissed in her ear. The curse dies with him. Lucien looked up, his crimson eyes finding Nera. Blood, dark as ink, dripped from his lips. Run, he managed. Please. I won't leave you again, Nera sobbed, struggling against the hunter's grip. Not again. Constantine twisted the stake. Lucien's scream tore through the ruined restaurant, a sound of agony that seemed to shake the very foundations. Through the shattered windows, Nera could see the sky beginning to lighten. Dawn was coming. The sun will finish what I started, Constantine said coldly. Your king will burn, and you'll be free of this curse. Something snapped inside Nera, not breaking, but awakening. The memories weren't just images anymore. They were knowledge, understanding, 500 years of love compressed into a single moment of absolute clarity. She knew what to do. Let me go, she said quietly. The hunter laughed. So you can save him? I don't think. Nera slammed her head backward, connecting with the woman's nose. The grip loosened just enough. She twisted free, grabbed a broken table leg, and swung it at Constantine's head. The priest ducked, but it gave her the second she needed. She grabbed the stake and yanked it free. Lucien collapsed forward, gasping. Black blood pooled beneath him. The wound was catastrophic. She could see through him, see the edges of flesh trying and failing to regenerate around the holy silver's damage. Nera, he breathed. Don't. You can't. She knew what he meant. The only way to heal a wound like this was vampire blood, ancient vampire blood. His own reserves were gone, burned through fighting the hunters. He would die unless... Blood debt, Nera whispered. Remembering, that's how the bond worked, my blood for your life. You'll become like me, Lucien gasped. Immortal, cursed, you'll never... I chose this 500 years ago, and I'm choosing it again. Nera pulled out a piece of broken glass. Blood welled up, bright red against her pale skin. Don't make me watch you die twice, she said softly, and pressed her bleeding hand to his lips. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Lucien's eyes blazed crimson, and his hand shot up, gripping her wrist. He drank, not much, just a few drops, but it was enough. The wound on his back began to close. Color returned to his face. The gray death receded like morning fog. But he pulled away before taking more than necessary, his expression tortured. You didn't have to, he whispered. Yes, Nera said, simply. I did. The first ray of sunlight struck through the broken window. Lucien stiffened, expecting the burn, the agony of dawn that should reduce him to ash.
But the light touched his skin and nothing happened. He stared at his hand in disbelief as morning sun painted it gold. The curse, Father Constantine breathed. It's broken. Not broken, Lucien said slowly, looking at Nera with wonder. Completed. She returned. She chose me again. The debt is paid. The hunters were already retreating, Constantine supporting the blonde woman whose nose Nera had broken. This isn't over, the priest warned, but his voice lacked conviction. They disappeared into the dawn, leaving destruction and silence behind. 3 weeks later, the Velvet Lantern reopened. New windows, repaired tables, the same dim lighting and soft jazz that had always defined it. Nera stood behind the bar, watching the first customers trickle in. She'd convinced the insurance company it had been a gas explosion. Most people believed it. Danny didn't, but he hadn't asked questions.
At 11:47 p.m., she felt him before she saw him. Lucien walked through the door, and this time, he didn't head for table 17. He walked straight to the bar, to her, and placed something on the polished wood between them. His silver ring. 2 crescent moons encircling a rose. I wanted you to have this, since you're part of the House of Dusk now, even if it's a house of 2. Nira picked up the ring, feeling the weight of centuries in the metal. Where have you been? She asked. Finding a more permanent solution to vengeful priests, he said with the ghost of a smile, and adjusting to something I haven't experienced in 500 years. What's that? Hope. Nira smiled and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She reached under the bar and pulled out a napkin, already prepared. In careful, deliberate script, the old way, with flourishes from another century, she'd written a single sentence. Next time, you won't have to ask. Lucien read it and laughed, a real laugh, bright and genuine and utterly human. Next time, he agreed, I'll simply know. He held out his hand, and Nira, who had died for him once and chosen him twice, took it without hesitation. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city. But inside, the velvet lantern had finally found its peace. The end.